What's up guys, and welcome back to another episode of Pokemon Origins with me, TheOneIntegral. In today's episode we are going to be covering Cyndaquil and its evolutions to the fire starter line from the Johto region. Obviously next time we're going to be covering Totodile and the water starter line from Johto, but then we're going to look at some more Johto Pokemon, so be sure to suggest some more Pokemon you want to see down below, and obviously then after that home, just any Pokemon you want to see, let me know what you want. But for now, let's have a look at Cyndaquil. So, Cyndaquil is number 155 in the National Pokédex, and its Japanese name is Hinorashi. It is the Fire Mouse Pokemon and is a pure Fire type, being obviously the Fire starter for Johto. Cyndaquil stands at 0.5 meters or 1 foot 8 inches tall, so it's not that tall a Pokemon, but it is half a meter tall, so it's not like really small, it's just sort of medium-sized height almost, bigger than any mouse you would see in real life. It also weighs 7.9 kilograms or 17.4 pounds, so it's not too heavy either, being, you know, obviously fairly small. Looking at its models from Generation 6, you can see here, it's regular and its shiny form. Shiny form, basically we have some sort of browny, almost like a sort of autumny colour on its back, and that's really the only change there, so there's not much to say apart from the fact that its back is now, you know, sort of a dark brown colour, basically. Evolution-wise, you know, being the starter Pokemon from Johto evolves fairly quickly, so Cyndaquil will evolve into Quilava starting at level 14, so a bit earlier than some starters, which will be like level 18, a bit earlier than that, just because Quilava's not too powerful, but it is pretty powerful, so it does evolve a bit earlier on than other starters, which is, you know, I'm not going to complain really, am I? I'm not going to complain. So, Cyndaquil is a small mouse-like Pokemon, being, you know, the Fire Mouse Pokemon, that would make sense, and it has bluish fur covering sort of all the way down its back, and also the top of its head as well. It's not really just its back, it's like sort of its forehead, the top of its nose, the top of its snout, and it's just sort of hard. It's basically, you've just cut its body along the side, you know, just drawn a line along the side of its body. Top part is a darky bluey colour, and then the bottom side is cream. It's cream coloured. Make a nice contrast. Cyndaquil also has flames covering its back, as you can see in the Sugamoria, but when it is unlit, you can see two orange spots visible on its back, and as you can see there in the two Generation 6 models, or sort of in the little icon we have, you know, for the evolution one there. But there's no flames there, so you have two orange spots, and this is where the flames come from. This is sort of, I guess, the heat. Obviously, you know, to have flames burn, you need oxygen as well, so we can assume these spots don't put flames out, they sort of heat up, and then eventually the air around it will combust and you get the flames basically. Cyndaquil also has small arms and legs, as you can see, two little diddy arms coming through, and then its legs are pretty small at the back as well, and it has one small claw on each of its feet, just sort of a little, it's a pretty long claw, it just comes out of its foot and it just comes around again, that's it, there's just one there. As I mentioned earlier, Cyndaquil does have some sort of elongated snout or nose coming off of its face, it's not just sort of a round head, it's got this snout coming off. As well as this, it also has two thin eyes, just sort of going, you know, across each side of its head. Thin eyes, they are actually closed. I don't think you ever see Cyndaquil with its eyes open. Don't hold me to that though. I've never seen it though. But it has these thin eyes, or, you know, closed eyes almost. That are just lines, because some babies in real life as well, they'll have their eyes closed when they're first born, just so that their eyes don't, I guess, you know, get affected by light too much. They have to accustom to the light, so they have their eyes closed. I'm pretty sure human babies might do it as well. I'm no expert on those, but they might do it as well, just to sort of get accustomed to it. But yeah, that's that there. So, if we take a look at the Pokédex entries for Cyndaquil, seeing what we find out from those, we find out basically it has a timid nature. It's a very shy Pokemon, basically. It's a bit scared, bit shy, timid, basically. It will curl up into a ball because of this, and just sit there, and, you know, because it's very timid. It doesn't want to, you know, it's scared to talk to other people or whatever. So it curls up in a ball, and it can also flare up its back if it feels threatened or if it gets attacked, for example. So that's its self-defense mechanism. So Cyndaquil is basically, it's your good old sort of tortoise-like thing, you know. It can just withdraw into a shell, except it's not really a shell, it's just curling up into a ball. So it's not as good protection, but it has fire on its back, so that sort of counteracts that there. The flames and the fire on its back are actually hottest when it's angry, okay? So, thinking about how this might work biologically, it doesn't really say, you know, biologically fire, you know, whatever. Biologically, if it's angry, it might have more blood pumping around its veins, if they have veins, of course, who knows. Yeah, so its blood or whatever it has, it's going to be pumping faster because it's angrier. This might be getting giving more oxygen to these fire spots. Obviously the fire spots, even if they're heated up, they might not actually burst into flame without some sort of catalyst or something to make them boom. So maybe if it has to pass oxygen from its bloodstream into these fire spots, and maybe obviously angry, blood's going to run quicker, so you can get more oxygen, and then the flames are going to be much bigger and hotter and whatnot. If it's tired, however, these flames are going to sputter, and sputter is a bit of a weird word, but it means like go on and off periodically. So they're not going to be strong flames. They're just going to they might go up for a bit, but then they're going to end off. So if Cyndaquil is tired, its blood might obviously not going to be flowing as too far. If it's tired as well, its breathing might be slower, less oxygen getting to it. So basically, yeah, that sort of thing there. So, the origin of Cyndaquil, what's it based off of? Well, straight up, it has the appearance of an echidna. As well as this, it also holds traits of a shrew as well, particularly the long snout it has coming off the front of its face. Its closed eyes may refer to a baby honey badger, for reasons we'll look at later on in this episode. But obviously, when baby honey badgers are born, they have closed eyes, so Cyndaquil has to say in there, could possibly be referring to that. The fire on its back also resembles a porcupine's spines, looks very similar, so that's probably a very big reference there, and as we look at the naming, it influences even more there. So the Japanese name Hinorashi is a combination of hi, meaning fire, and Yamarashi, which is meaning porcupine. So, as I just said then, its fire does resemble a porcupine's spines, and porcupine features basically in the name, so it's obvious this was some sort of, at least some sort of reference or some sort of inspiration for that there. This name could also be taken to mean Hi no Arashi, which means storm of fire. So, fire and then Arashi might mean sort of storm or a lot of, because Yama Arashi, maybe lots of quills, maybe Arashi means lots of, so then no might be, of, so maybe porcupine is like storm of quills, so Hino Arashi might be storm of fire, something like that. I don't know Japanese, I'm just sort of, and there's speculating in my head. The English name Cyndaquil is a combination of cinder and quill, cinder being, to burn and stuff like that, and quill again referring to a porcupine's quills. Looking at one other name for it, we have Volcane, which is Korean for Cyndaquil, which is a combination of bul, meaning fire, and Hurricane, meaning hurricane. So fire hurricane basically, and this again referring to the fire on its back. Sort of, you can assume it's not going to be still. It's going to be jutting in and out, and up and down and whatnot. So it makes a lot of sense there for some sort of hurricane. It looks a lot like that. Same with the storm of fire. Finally, for Cyndaquil, if we take a look at its size, standing at 0.5 meters or 1 foot 8 inches, it's fairly small. And comparing it to me and Ash, you can see there, boom, there we are. Almost sort of looking at the grid behind it, about pretty much 2 squares high, whereas Ash is, 2, 4, 6, almost 7 and a bit. So it's small, but then again it's pretty big as well. It's bigger than any mouse you'd see in real life, as I've said. You could probably pick Cyndaquil up if it's small enough to do that. So it can be used, it can be picked up in that sort of sense as well. So that's it for Cyndaquil. So if we now move on to look at its evolution, Quilava. So Quilava is number 156 in the National Pokédex, coming right after Cyndaquil, makes sense, and its Japanese name is Magmarashi, so very similar to Cyndaquil, or very similar to the previous one, Hinorashi. Quilava is now the Volcano Pokemon, and again is a pure fire type. He stands at 0.9 meters or 2 foot 11 inches, and weighs 19 kilograms or 41.9 pounds. Now, looking at the height here, we have to assume that the height is actually the length of its body. You can see in its Sugimori art how it stood up here. This will be its height, basically, because of the length of its body, but when it is normally sort of sat down, led down on all fours, it's not going to be, almost a meter tall there. So it makes it very hard to actually do the height comparison, which we'll look at later on, obviously. Looking at the models from Generation 6, as I just said, if it's like this, I can't really do a height comparison too easily because it looks really weird. But you can see there, very similar shiny pattern to how Cyndaquil had. Exactly the same, apart from sort of a browny, auburn, autumn colour on its back, basically. Evolution-wise, as we said, Cyndaquil evolved into Quilava starting at level 14, and Quilava will then further evolve into Typhlosion starting at level 36. So a bit later than some starters, which will be level 32. It's sort of a trade, You'll get Quilava earlier, but Typhlosion a bit later. So, Quilava. It is a medium-sized Pokemon that can either stand on 2 legs, as we see in its Super Mario art, or run with 4, as we can sort of see, or run or just, again, sit with 4 legs, as you can see in the models, and also in its evolutionary picture. Like Cyndaquil, it has blue fur down and along its back, and the top of its head, or upper half of its head rather, and a cream underside, pretty much exactly the same. The flames that Cyndaquil had on its back have now sort of shifted slightly. Some of the flames have come up to the top of its head, where we have, the sort of Mohican-like thing coming up straight in the middle of its head, and some have gone down to its lower back, where we just see some, just fly out, sort of like a tail-ish, not really quite like a tail, just sort of like a mass of fire, basically. When the fire is not burning, you can see 2 fire spots on the top of its head, as you can see clearly in the models there. One just sort of right on its forehead, and one more to the top of its head, and then also 3 on the bottom of its back there. You can't see these in any of this thing, but I might have a photo on screen to show you guys if we have any luck. Anyway, 3 on its lower back there, just to sort of get the fire again. Quilava has these small back legs and slightly longer front legs, I think, because in Super Mario obviously it's just stood on these back legs, which are more just like feet, whereas you can see the 2 front legs hanging down, so we can assume they might be a bit longer, and obviously this will be helpful for running as well. Quilava also has 2 small pointy ears with red insides that Cyndaquil didn't have. We had no ears for Cyndaquil, but you can see these 2 pointy ears coming up either side with these dark red insides, and also some dark red eyes, because obviously now Cyndaquil didn't have his eyes open. Quilava now does have them open, and you can see clearly that it has some nice dark red powerful eyes. So if we take a look at the Pokédex entries for Quilava now, find out a bit more about it, we find much like Cyndaquil sort of flared up its back to sort of, keep itself safe almost, Quilava, alternatively, intimidates the foes with the flames before battle. It will turn around and, flare up its back and be like, yo, look at my flames, I'm gonna burn you, basically. So, Quilava's a bit more confident than Cyndaquil. And also attacks with these flames as well. All it's got to do is run up to the Pokemon, give it a headbutt, the flames are going to hit you, do a iron tail, even though Quilava doesn't actually have a tail. You guys get the idea. Quilava can also heat up the air around it and blow this air towards an enemy, and this is going to be, it will heat up the air to create, as it's referred to in the Pokédex, superheated air, and then blow it towards the enemy. And superheated air is not going to be nice, so it might, daze the opponent or confuse them or whatever. It's not going to be nice indeed. Quilava's fur is actually non-flammable, which means it can withstand fire type attacks, and also the fact that its fire is not going to burn its fur off. We can assume Cyndaquil and Typhlosion also have non-flammable fur, otherwise the fire that it lights on its back or whatever is just going to burn all its fur off, and you'd have just a naked Cyndaquil with cream all over it, which wouldn't be nice. So we can assume the whole trio has non-flammable fur. Quilava is also very agile, and it uses its agility to dodge attacks and retaliate, so it can dodge a bubble beam and then come back in and attack with its flames and whatnot. So it's a very fast and agile Pokemon, having its 4 legs to dodge and dive around on. So the origin for Quilava, what's it based off of? Well, it moves on from Cyndaquil really. Cyndaquil, we had the Shrew and the Echidna. Now we have Quilava, which looks similar to any member of, or most members of, the Weasel family, okay? In particular, a stoat, and this is because of the fact that it lacks a tail and also has a darker upper body. So some weasels will have tails, but stoats don't, and stoats also generally have sort of, as you can see in the picture, a dark upper body and sort of, a lighter underside. Quilava is also a bit similar to a paca, which is a South American rodent with a thin body, and you can see in this picture here, it does look a bit similar, with its sort of legs and its head coming forward at the front, as well as these stripes of fur, stripes of lighter fur that go along to the back. You can sort of imagine it be similar to Quilava's fur as well, with having this dark brown fur on the top, and also its underside seems to be lighter as well, so again carrying on that theme as well. So looking at the names for Quilava, its Japanese name Magma Arashi is a combination of magma, which is obvious, and Yama Arashi again, meaning porcupine, so really it's nothing too extra here. They just take out He, meaning fire, and put magma in there. Since Quilava is the volcano Pokemon, it makes a lot of sense. The English name, Quilava, is a combination of quill and lava, so like we had Cyndaquil, we had quill at the end, we now have Quilava having quill at the front, and then adding lava again because it's the volcano Pokemon. Looking at one other name for Quilava, we have the German name Igelva, which is a combination of Igel, meaning hedgehog, and Lava. So very similar there. Lava hedgehog. And again, hedgehog is just referring to the spines and the spikes on its back. Doesn't look too much like a hedgehog. Cyndaquil might have looked a bit like it if it had more spines or more fire covering it, but you guys get the idea there. So before we move on from Quilava, let's take a quick look at the size. As I mentioned at the start, I had a bit of trouble because obviously the model is forward facing, you can't actually tell its full height. So instead we have the Sugimori art here, and you can see its height being 0.9 meters or 2 foot 11 inches. It stands basically almost twice the height of Cyndaquil. It would have been, I didn't want to use the model because I could have, evened it up, but it would have been very small. Quilava would have been very small, possibly even smaller than Cyndaquil. Or, well, I mean, if you compare the evolutionary models there, you can see its height is smaller than Cyndaquil if it's on all fours. So I use the Sugimori art instead. It gives you a bit more of an idea how big it is in general. As you can see, it's pretty big. You wouldn't really want to pick Quilava up, especially if it decided to flare up its fire, because that generally wouldn't be nice for you, would it? No, not at all. So if we move on from Quilava to the final Pokemon for today's episode, Typhlosion. Typhlosion is number 157 in the National Pokédex, coming right after Quilava, and its Japanese name is Bakfu. And like Quilava, it is the Volcano Pokemon, as well as being a pure fire type again, much like, Typhlosion Meganium being a pure grass type, and Feraligatr being a pure water type. Looking at the height and weight of Typhlosion, we can see it now stands at 1.7 meters or 5 foot 7 inches and weighs 79.5 kilograms or 175.3 pounds, so it's definitely gotten a good bit bigger than it was as a Quilava. Looking at the models for Generation 6, we have slightly better angles than Quilava this time. You can see Typhlosion stood right there. Shiny form again, exactly the same as Cyndaquil and Quilava, just sort of the dark reddy back basically. And I feel like its chest might be slightly darker as well, but that might just be me hoping it's a bit more different there. So, Typhlosion. It's a large bipedal Pokemon. It can run on four legs, as we see in some anime sources, but generally it's seen just standing on 2 feet there, and it stands tall with these powerful arms and legs, much more powerful than Cyndaquil or Quilava. It's now actually bulked them up a bit. Its legs are now seem powerful enough to hold its weight, and its arms, they seem pretty strong as well. It could probably have a good fight with something. Again, it has a blue back and a cream coloured underside, nothing too much changing there, and flames have now moved to encircle around its neck. So we've gone from its back to its lower back and its head, and then they've combined again on the back of its neck to form this sort of frill almost around its neck, which looks really cool. I really do like it. The fur at the bottom of its back also tails off in some sort of mini cape-like thing, not quite a cape, just sort of, it tails off, it doesn't just stop, you get a bit of long hair at the bottom, just for effect I guess, who knows. Much like Quilava, it also has 2 long pointy ears on top of its head. They don't have any insides that you can see this time, they're just sort of, they come off the back of its head and go up. And whereas Cyndaquil had some sort of long snouts, Quilava didn't really have a snout, it just had the front of its face. Well, Typhlosion sort of gets a bit more of a snout again, and you can see it, its front of its face is a bit longer, not too much longer, not as long as Cyndaquil by far, just a bit longer and a bit much there. And it has 4 sharp teeth inside this mouth, snout or whatever, and a long tongue, you can see in the Sugimori art, that comes out as well. So Typhlosion is certainly not one to mess with. Its eyes again, I'm assuming they're red coloured again, you can't see them very well because they are pretty small compared to the rest of it, basically. So Pokédex entries to Typhlosion, very similar to the previous ones. Much like Quilava, we know it attacks with fire, however Typhlosion now attacks with blasts of fire. So we know it can breathe fire. So now it has the ability to sort of send out more bigger bursts of fire and whatnot. Just getting very powerful there. It's probably what's in the main bit of its big body, some sort of method to produce the fire. We won't go into too much detail about that. But if Typhlosion is angry enough, it becomes hot enough to burn anything it touches. We assume with the flame, not like its hand or whatever. We assume with the flame around its neck or any fire it breathes out. So again, much like Quilava being angry, if it's angry enough, this flame is going to be hotter. So again, just blood running around with oxygen possibly. Typhlosion could also create heat shimmers to hide itself. Heat shimmers being just basically heating up the air around you to create the sort of the effect you get in the summer, where it seems like in the distance stuff is shimmering and shining, stuff like that. Except Typhlosion can produce it to a much bigger extent to actually hide itself sort of in the shimmers and behind it, distract the enemy basically. And we can assume it does this using the frill of fire around its neck, just sort of heating up the air around it like that, you know, just exuding its heat to the surroundings. Finally, we learn that Typhlosion's fur, which we can assume is non-flammable like Quilava's, if you rub it together can cause huge explosions. So we can assume there is some sort of fire-making property inside the fur as well. Who knows, but yeah, very interesting there. Typhlosion can basically blow itself up. Interesting. The origin of Typhlosion, what's it based off of? Well, simply it's based on a honey badger. Its body shape is very similar to it, except the honey badger usually is seen on 4 feet, but the body shape is very similar with the darker fur on the back and the lighter fur on the underside, or at least some sort of change in fur like that. And its face as well is very, very similar as well. It's also similar to a weasel or a wolverine. Wolverine not being, you know, the film Wolverine, being an actual wolverine. It's a creature called a wolverine. It looks similar to it, not too similar in my opinion, but it does look a bit similar to it. There are some similarities between the two. Sort of the long body, the head, I guess, looks similar as well, but the long body and sort of the trailing fur at the back of its bottom of its back as well is another reason why it looks much like a weasel. But that's really it for Typhlosion's origin there. So the name. The Japanese name Bakufu is a combination of Bakufu, which is blast, and typhoon, which is, you know, a typhoon basically. Nothing too much to say about that. So, you know, blast, typhoon, basically. Nothing much apart from that. The English name Typhlosion is a combination of typhoon and explosion, so very similar, blast being changed out for explosion and then reversing the order. So typhoon and explosion, exploding typhoon. It's also similar to typhus, the Greek word meaning hazy, and this is referring to the fact that it can create heat shimmers about itself and create a haze in the air to hide itself basically. It could also come from Typhon, who is a monster in Greek mythology. Now you might think, how does this really affect us at all? Well, he married, I think it was, or he at least fathered children with Echidna, a female monster, obviously. So Echidna being what our little Cyndaquil was based off at the beginning of, so there might be a link there as well. Then, the German name for Typhlosion, Tornupto, is a combination of tornado and eruption. So very similar, except we get rid of typhoon and put tornado there, and also eruption, referring to the fact that it is a volcano Pokemon. And I quite like the name Tornupto. It's very interesting as well. I prefer Typhlosion, but Tornupto is very nice as well there. It's not too bad at all. So finally, before we finish up here, we have a look at the size of Typhlosion. Being 1.7 meters, it's 4 inches taller than Ash, and as you can see, that is reflected in its design there. Not quite as tall as me, but you certainly wouldn't want to mess with a Typhlosion anyway. Look at those huge arms and powerful legs to chase you down, as well as not to mention the fire coming out from around its neck. Pretty darn deadly. Pretty darn deadly there. So guys, that's going to be it for Typhlosion and obviously this whole line today. If you enjoyed the episode, do not forget to put a like down below on that like button. It'd be very nice if you could. And also suggest some more Pokemon for me to cover in future episodes of Pokemon Origins. We're covering Totodile and its evolution line next week, then some more Johto Pokemon, so get your suggestions in for those. For now guys, I'll be seeing you next time. Thank you for watching. Goodbye my friends.